World War I's battlefields have left Budapest's morgues overflowing. 2 years of relentless carnage has resulted in mass casualties, hundreds executed for desertion. But some of those bodies are victims of crime. You won't believe what happened next. Because there's a new breed of wartime criminal, and he has a specific target: women. Detective Charles Nagy walks through the streets of Cinkota, a small farming village outside Budapest, where all the residents know each other by name. He turns onto Kossuth Street and stops outside a house, one story, concrete walls, painted white. A group of men are standing at the door, mumbling to each other, shaking their heads in disgust. Nagy can already smell it, the unmistakable stench of putrefaction. It's strong, overbearing. Men hold handkerchiefs to their faces. They direct Nagy to a stack of oil drums in the yard. Some have been opened. Nagy puts his hand over his mouth. It's not just the smell of death. The air reeks of chemicals. He steps closer and freezes. Inside the open drum is long, black human hair. It's connected to pale, waxy skin, a woman's face preserved in some kind of liquid. Nagy glances at the other barrels. His eyes meet a local police officer's. The cop, his face solemn, nods his head. All of them contain the same horrifying secret. 1912. Everyone in Cinkota liked Béla Kiss. 30-something, blonde, handsome. He's got money and he's smart. He's retired now, but he used to be a tinsmith, and he made a lot of money. One of the local newspapers called him a man of good character and not in debt. He was very well-read, familiar with arts and literature. Men enjoyed his company, and women were drawn to him. Béla had a way with words. He was charming as they come. His aunt once said about him, "He went abroad and wandered everywhere. He was very educated, constantly reading and studying. He spoke 7 languages, which he often boasted about." But what really fascinated women wasn't just his charm. It was his knowledge of the occult, astrology, and most of all, his ability to reveal their future with the crystal ball that he kept in the house. He used to be the most eligible bachelor in town, but now he's closed off his house to locals. The only people he's seen with are fine-looking women from Budapest. Béla's housekeeper, Mrs. Jakobets, can barely even keep up with all the new faces. The women, always dressed in expensive garments, turn up for their fortune readings, hoping Béla will match them with a perfect man. Or himself. Ms. Jakobets knows Béla puts personal ads in the newspapers. He calls himself a self-made man looking for a new wife. She doesn't know everything, though. The fact that before she started working for him, his life had been marked by tragedy, relationships that had turned ugly. Béla had 2 great loves in his life. The first, Julia Patriotic, married him in 1905, but the relationship was over a year later. No one knew what happened to her. It was rumored she'd returned to her village. Just before Béla had hired Miss Jakobek in 1912, he'd married again. It lasted only about 6 months, but everyone saw he was smitten with that girl, Marie, the love of his life. 15 years younger than Béla, she was said to be stunningly beautiful from the town of Gimonia to the south. His few friends noticed how incredibly jealous and possessive he was. He barely let Marie leave his side, but he didn't have a choice when he had to go to Budapest, apparently for business. Although Miss Jakobek didn't know exactly what he did there. One thing was clear to the gossiping locals: when Béla was on those trips, Marie wasn't alone. She was with a man younger than Béla and even better looking, an artist, Paul Bicari, more cultured, more admired by writers and creatives at Budapest's trendy Auton Club. When Béla was away, he and Marie were seen picnicking together in the woods, getting close. This went on for months, and then one evening Béla returned home from Budapest and found the house empty. A note lay on the dining room table. "Please forgive me." Marie had left him. Béla's friend and neighbor, Mr. Littman, saw Béla that same night. Béla was raging, his eyes filled with tears. He'd never loved anyone as much as he loved Marie. That was when everything changed. Béla went from being the toast of the town to becoming sullen and isolated. He barely ever left the house. All he seemed interested in was mysticism. If anyone asked, Béla told them Marie had run off with Bicari to the USA. He started to look sick, his face became pale, and he lost weight. Mr. Littman couldn't believe what he was seeing. When he went around to visit, Béla had spent weeks barely even getting out of bed. Béla told him, "If I die, what matters? I have nothing to live for, now that my dear one has left me." But at least he agreed to have a nurse come around to the house. She was the elderly Miss Kalman, a wonderful lady who waited on Béla hand and foot until he had the strength to face the world. She worked there for 3 weeks, and Béla was ever so thankful, paying her a substantial sum. She never asked about the barrels that he seemed to be collecting. She'd seen them the first time when one night she spied through the keyhole of his secret room, oil drums all lined up. Next to them were clothes she presumed must have belonged to Marie. Miss Kallman suspected Béla was making moonshine. Illicit activity? No, he laughed. Just oil that he'd bought from a guy who wanted to make some fast cash. Béla told her Europe was probably on the verge of war, and he was a patriot. When the time came, he'd gladly donate all the oil to the war effort. He was stockpiling. He was lying through his teeth. Marie was in one of those drums, and she wasn't alone. Béla had a collection, and it would grow even bigger. With Mrs. Kallman gone, Mrs. Jakubek arrived. Béla's party days were over. He kept to himself, barely even speaking to his neighbors. When he went out on his mysterious trips, he'd often come back at strange hours. People would hear his car pull into his driveway late at night or in the early morning. The locals began spreading rumors. Heartbroken, Béla had gone to the dark side. Astrology? No, it was black magic. But for most, these were just superstitious rumors. The local police heard them and they discounted them immediately. Sometimes officers would visit Béla at his house and enjoy his famous hospitality. Officers once even helped him move his oil drums. And anyway, Mrs. Jakubek saw Béla wasn't isolated at all. He had women writing to him almost daily. Stacks of letters would arrive at the house. But Mrs. Jakubek knew better than to pry. His love life was a private matter. So was the room that he wrote the letters in, the only place Béla kept locked. Sometimes the women would come to the house, pretty, well-dressed, obviously from money. One day they'd be on Béla's arm, but rarely did anyone see him with the same woman twice. He received so many letters that the postmaster stopped him one day and asked him how it was possible. Fortune-telling, Béla told him. But for the men of Hungary, there was only one future: war. In June 1914, Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in the streets of Sarajevo. The murder was the spark that set off the conflagration of World War I. So, in 1914, like most other Hungarian men aged 18 to 55 years old, 37-year-old Béla was conscripted. Mrs. Jakubek promised that she would take good care of the house in his absence. She didn't ask why Béla had put bars on the windows before he left, but she knew that he was a man of means. Sometimes when cleaning, she'd see stacks of money, jewelry, and precious metals. The bars were probably just a precaution. Béla left for basic training and was deployed to the Serbian front in November. It was a bloodbath. But 18 months later, he sent a letter to Mr. Littman from a town on the Serbian side of the Danube. Littman wrote back immediately, but his letter was returned. He soon found out that Béla had died from shrapnel wounds in a military hospital near Belgrade. Well, that's what he thought. There were many rumors as to what happened to Béla. The people of Cinkota grieved. Poor man to be cheated on by his wife and then die in the war. Béla's name soon appeared at the local war memorial. He was a hero, but that wasn't strictly true, and neither was it true that he was dead. His landlord, Martin Krasinski, believed that he was dead, so decided to do some renovations. Some say it was soldiers who uncovered Béla's oil drums. Others say Krasinski was the one who discovered what Béla had been hiding. 7 barrels at first. Then the police found another 17. Before that, Krasinski punctured one of the barrels. It wasn't oil inside, but by the time Detective Nagy arrived, others had been opened. 23 women, most of them young. One man, the artist Paul Bicari, each of them preserved in chemicals. As Nagy inspected one of the bodies, he stood back in shock. She had been drained of blood, and so had the others. Nagy had heard the rumors of black magic. Surely this could not be a case of vampirism. The chemical used was methanol. Béla had functionally pickled them, but draining the bodies, that part Nagy couldn't figure out. And maybe there were more bodies because everyone knew Béla liked to travel, and he usually had a woman on his arm. Detectives already knew he corresponded with all kinds of women. This had gone on for years. But what about Mrs. Jakubek? She became hysterical when the detectives told her what was in the oil drums, and she was now a suspect, especially when the detectives found Béla's will and her name written in it. She'd be a rich woman thanks to Béla stealing what detectives already knew was a significant amount of money. Mrs. Jakubek swore that she knew nothing about Béla's crimes. She told the detectives he hadn't even allowed her into the room where he spent most of his time when he was home. Nagy had his men bust the lock open. Before them stood a room lined with bookcases and letters. They found 74 separate files, close to 200 letters, each file representing a different woman. Béla hadn't just been telling fortunes, he had run a fake matchmaking business. And police found 174 marriage proposals to Béla himself. He'd accepted at least 70 of them. These were all responses to ads he'd put into newspapers. He claimed to be a wealthy widower, sometimes calling himself Hoffman, sometimes Elamir. Béla was dashing. He was a professional. He was rich. But he wasn't exactly earning his money the righteous way. He preyed on the lonely, but only if they came with money. Most of the women who wrote to him were desperate for love. The letters showed some had sent him fortunes before even meeting him in person. And he had chosen carefully, always picking women who didn't seem to have strong family connections. Women who lived alone and wouldn't raise alarms if they went missing, like Catherine Varga. Police saw her initials KV sewn into some of the clothes they found at Béla's house. They tracked her down in Budapest, where she'd been a dressmaker living alone. One day, she sold her business and told her friends that she just met the love of her life, and that was it. They never saw her again. And there was Julia Patriotic, his first wife, whose full name was embroidered onto another item of clothing detectives found. It was said Julia was found in one of the barrels. She had 2 children, but left them with a relative when she moved in with Béla. She was never seen again after living with him for less than a year. Court records showed a woman named Elizabeth Comeroni had tried to sue Béla for marriage fraud. She didn't turn up for the court hearings, so the case was dropped. She also went missing. In another barrel was the body of 27-year-old Cătălin Cucan. The evidence showed he had stolen 1,600 crowns, $10,000 today, from her before he told people she'd returned to her village to have his child. That was a lot of money. The average Hungarian in lower-skilled manufacturing work earned between 800 and 1,000 crowns a year, and Béla had stolen tens of thousands from his victims. Some were young, like 16-year-old cook Maria Handler. She was one of 5 to 7 women whose bodies were identified. The bodies were quite well preserved, but years in a barrel had changed their appearances. As for how he killed his victims, a Hungarian academic who was there at the time wrote, he tied a noose around his victims' necks with a lasso and wound the rope around the women's necks, pulled it tight, and then knotted it. He made so-called sailor's knots. He'd have his lasso ready, sneak up behind them, and within seconds they'd be fighting for their life. A pathologist at the time said some victims might have been poisoned, so they were no doubt easy prey when Béla sneaked up on them. They were all perfectly packed into the drums, their arms and legs neatly folded like a science exhibit. Detectives also found about 200 tickets from pawn shops. Béla had pawned the women's clothes and jewelry. Some had arrived at his house with suitcases. Everything they owned. Béla had sold most of their things and hid the receipts under the carpet. But how was it possible that Mrs. Jakobets hadn't noticed that Béla was murdering women when she was there 24/7? "Don't send me to prison," she kept crying out. "I'm just a simple woman." At first, she was convinced Béla hadn't hurt anyone. She said that he was a good man. She'd once seen him nurse an injured dog back to health after one of its legs had been broken. Sure, she had seen plenty of women at the house, always polite, distinguished, but she'd swore that they'd all returned home after staying a night or two. But like Béla's neighbors, like many of his victims, she had been taken in by a man detectives would soon realize was smarter than everyone around him. And they'd soon find out the hard way that he was also smarter than them. As for Mrs. Jakobets, she later testified, "A month after I came to him, he made fun of me. He visited me once a week in the kitchen where I slept. I can honestly say that I know nothing about the barrels." She was never convicted of a crime and no doubt was completely innocent. But the big question was Béla dead? The detectives received mixed reports, but they were quite sure he was still alive. The problem was his name was common, so it was a matter of tracking him among the millions of bodies fighting in Europe. They knew that before the war he traveled a lot. He had an apartment in Budapest and 3 in Vienna. Witnesses came forward and said that wherever they saw him, he was with women. The more the detectives learned, the more they understood just how utterly ruthless he was. One day, Detective Nagy was visited at his office by Mrs. Stephen Toth. She had reported Béla over a decade ago. She told them her beautiful daughter Margaret had fallen in love with Béla back in 1906. One day, Margaret turned up at the family home with him in tow. She announced that they would marry, but for her to enjoy the fruits of Béla's labor, she needed money. It was the custom for Hungarians with money for the woman's family to pay the man a dowry. After all, she was going to marry into wealth. But no sooner than Béla had collected his bounty, he went back on his proposal. Mrs. Tulth was irate and stomped off to find Béla at his house. "Calm down," he told her. The marriage was still on. It was all Margaret's fault. She'd gone off to America, but when she came back, he would make good on his promise. Béla was always talking about the USA. Is that where he went when he was on the run, to find more women to murder? It's possible. After looking through Béla's letters, the detectives knew what had happened to Margaret. He'd forced her to write a letter to her mother, stating that Béla had rejected her. Her heart was broken, and that's why she'd gone to the USA to find a new love. But she was dead. He had killed her. The detectives found a handkerchief at the house that bore the initials MT, and they found what appeared to be her body in one of the drums. Exactly what had happened to her gave the detectives a clear outline of Béla's MO. She had met him while she was working in the Hotel Bristol in Budapest. After convincing her he was the perfect man, he got her to hand over 3,000 crowns, around $18,000 in 2025. She'd gone to live with him on April 8th and had taken with her another 1,400. One of her friends later appeared at the house, and Béla told her he and Margaret had argued and she had run off. Detectives now figured that Béla might have started killing as early as 1903. And since he traveled so much, they now wondered if there were a lot more victims than they had found in those barrels. There were survivors too, like Luisa Rusht, the young daughter of a shopkeeper in the famous Józsefváros quarters of Budapest. She had told the detectives she'd met a handsome man at the theater. He spoke well and seemed to know a lot about the more sophisticated matters of life, so she agreed to meet up again. He picked her up in his car a day later, driving first to his house for a drink and then on to Budapest for a meal at a nice restaurant. Luisa felt happily wined and dined when he asked her if she'd like to go to his place for a nightcap. But it was so much more than a nightcap. The next thing she knew, her head was spinning. He told her not to worry. It would help her focus as he prepared to read her fortune. He brought out his crystal ball and he told her to stare into it. She could barely see straight when in the reflection of a mirror to her side she saw a figure holding what looked like a length of rope. When she awoke, it was dark, and she was in Erzsébet Park. The money she had on her that night was gone, as was her expensive jewelry. She reported it to the police, but she couldn't remember where the man had lived. The authorities thought that she probably overreacted to a date gone wrong, but they would soon change their minds. Only a month or so later, another young woman woke up with all of her valuables missing. The man who had stolen from her had called himself Franz Hoffmann, a name written on much of the correspondence the police found in Béla's secret room. She had just come out of church one day in her best dress and might have been hit by a passing taxi had a handsome gentleman not grabbed her hand and pulled her away. They started talking and soon realized they shared an interest in spiritualism. She was married, her husband was in Paris, so when Franz invited her to dinner at his house, well, why not? He'd promised her that he'd read her fortune, an offer she couldn't refuse. But no sooner than Franz had held her concentration, the strange liquid he told her was alcohol knocked her off her feet. She was later found by police unconscious in a shop doorway. Marks on her neck were proof that Franz had tried to strangle her. For the police, this was now impossible to ignore. The fact that two women had come to them with almost the same story. Suspicion turned to panic when a third woman came forward. Except this time, the woman's jewelry was found. Someone had tried to pawn it. The cops were about to launch a thorough investigation when their world was turned upside down by the breakout of war. Many of the officers were sent to the battlefield. 2 years later, investigators knew that Franz Hoffmann was almost certainly Béla Kiss. But where was he now? Then they got the call. He had been found. He was either wounded in battle or struck by typhus. Some say he caught it after being taken prisoner in Valjevo, Serbia. No one could say for sure. A Hungarian source claims Béla had sent a postcard from the POW camp in which he had written to a chambermaid, Rosa Darvast, living in Budapest. Dear Rosa, with these lines I inform you, my dear, that I am a prisoner of war, and I beg you to be kind and send me 50 crowns by return postage, which I desperately need. Hugs, Béla, until we meet again. Detectives were sure he was in a hospital in Serbia and very much alive. They'd had him in their sights. It was just a matter of going to Serbia and making the arrest. A few days later, Hungarian police officers marched into the hospital, pushing past the young nurses. They were looking for a man, they said, a depraved maniac, a killer named Béla Kiss. But surely, she told the officer, such a very frank and pious-minded boy could not have committed such awful crimes. Boy? Béla Kiss was 40 years old, not a boy. No, she told him, he wasn't a day over 20. The officers walked past her and into what looked like a theater of death. Rows of beds, men covered from head to toe in bandages, some with tubes coming out of their mouths, some silent, some moaning. Some barely even had faces, their toothless mouths and jaws held together with wires. The officers started at the top and they read the names of the occupants of the beds. Somewhere in the middle of the ward, they found him. He wasn't moving. It was Béla Kiss. At least that's what the chalkboard at the foot of the bed had said. But the dead man lying there looked nothing like him. The officer didn't reply. His face was red with anger. Béla had obviously switched papers with a dead man. Notices went out all over Europe, Scotland Yard, the Paris 30. The killer was now on the loose. Béla could be anywhere, but without money in his pocket, it was surely only a matter of time until he killed again. This was no ordinary killer. He was exceptionally intelligent. He had studied his art, studied preservation. Killing for him was an exact science, and no doubt wherever he was, he would strike again. If not for money, then for pleasure. The word psychopath wasn't used much in the early 20th century, but Béla perfectly fit the mold. Superficial, deceiving, an inability to feel empathy or remorse, and incredibly cunning. And it was now looking like he probably had killed more women than the ones found at his home. Victims were found all over Budapest. One was the wife of a man who sold fur coats. Her body was discovered in the woods. Strangely, she was still wearing her wedding ring. There was a rumor that she had recently left her husband and gone off with all her valuables and a large amount of money after meeting another man. Her body was found in a shallow grave in an area where someone had once seen Béla walking hand in hand with a woman. And there were others. Isabel Koblitz, the nurse of Hungary's Minister of Commerce, was found in a field by farmers planting crops. It's not certain how she died, but if this was one of Béla's, he'd killed her before he went off to war, because she'd been reported missing back in 1913. He might have also murdered Miss Rinneker, a wealthy Swiss woman, her body found in a disused well. She was severely decomposed when found, but could be identified by a scar on her cheek and a leg that was slightly deformed. Those bodies in the barrels could just be the tip of the iceberg. If Béla had been killing since 1903, there could be bodies all over Hungary, and now he might be traveling around Europe or even beyond. War took up most of the pages of Europe's newspapers, but Béla was now the continent's new villain. They called him the Vampire of Cinkota, a man who drained his victims. But was he really a vampire? One of the contemporary sources claims Budapest's chief medical examiner wasn't sure why it looked like Béla had tried to drain the bodies of their blood. Maybe it was a method to make the bodies decompose at a slower rate. There's so much bacteria in blood. Maybe Béla wanted to keep the bodies in good condition. After all, they were his trophies. But maybe it was something else. Béla was obsessed with the occult. In some ways, you could call him a modern-day witch. Is that why he collected the blood? Was he casting spells? But what had made him into a monster? It wasn't clear. There's been speculation over the years that he had grown up with a very controlling mother or that he was seriously hurt as a child. But none of these theories can be substantiated. Still, that is usually the case: deep trauma, severe abuse, and maybe a serious head injury. He was a psychopath, no doubt. Charming, intelligent, no remorse. Some would say he had had a breakdown when Marie left him and that he'd come out of his deep depression with a hatred for women. But he'd murdered women long before he met Marie, so it's highly unlikely he had just stopped in the 1920s and 30s. There were many sightings. In May 1916, a Hungarian newspaper reported that a man claimed he'd worked with Béla in a wagon factory as a war laborer. Béla was using the name Lajos Kis. A woman came forward and said that she'd lived with a man with that same name for 20 days. He sounded a lot like Béla. Someone else claimed Béla had been arrested in Romania. Another rumor said he died of yellow fever in Turkey. The best evidence was that he had joined the French Foreign Legion. Detective Nagy received a report that a man going by the name Hoffman had bragged to his fellow soldiers about how he'd perfected his garroting skills. He said that he'd used a wire or a thin length of rope. He'd also said everyone thought he was dead, so he'd never be caught. The soldiers testified that Béla was living with a Moroccan woman at the time. When Nagy tried to check the story out, the man had already fled, but the description Nagy was given was a dead ringer for Béla. There were 3 reports in total of him joining the Legion, 2 from Africa and 1 from China. The last report in 1929 had him being shot in the African desert and on his deathbed confessing to a medic, "I see that I must die. My real name is not Béla Finyevesh, but Béla Kiss. I killed the women in Cinkota. The police of the whole world are looking for me." The report said he wanted to say more, but died before he could. Before that, in 1921, a newspaper, the Ellensieg, wrote the report. Private official Janos Bach, who has just returned from Russia, claims that Béla Kiss, the mass murderer of Cinkota, lives in Moscow as a Communist Party secretary. He said that Béla was living with a Tatar woman who had once admitted to him what he had done and that he had, quote, exchanged the death certificate of a fallen soldier at Valjevo. The sightings then stopped in Europe but started again in the USA. The US had its own cases of early 20th century serial killers, some of them unsolved, like the Cleveland torso murders. Since the outbreak of World War I, it seemed like there were suddenly more maniacs around. The biggest surprise came in 1933, when a newspaper reported Béla Kiss, the Cinkota mass murderer, has been captured. 17 years, said the report, Béla had been hiding in the US, and now, quote, the monster with the tin barrel has been captured. He is married and has 3 children. It was said that he stayed in the Chesapeake Bay area and had hooked up with a gangster outfit and had been involved in kidnappings. But nothing seemed to come of that news report. Not surprisingly, when New Yorkers heard that Béla Kiss might live amongst them, they were on edge. In the first few decades of the century, they lived through their own Jack the Ripper killer and later Albert Fish, aka the Brooklyn Vampire. Naturally, they weren't exactly keen to hear that a European vampire might have made their city his home. A man named Henry Oswald reported to the police that he had seen Béla, and he was 100% sure about it. The year was 1932. He had clearly seen Béla walking around on the platform of the Times Square subway station. And Oswald had a keen eye. He was so renowned for being able to spot a person in a crowd that he was known locally as Camera Eye. So, was Béla living in the Big Apple? Maybe, because in 1936, New York again erupted into a hive of serial killer panic. Someone had seen Béla working as a janitor. That person went straight to the police, and when they went to find the janitor at the apartment building, he had taken off. He was never seen again. Maybe Béla had gone to Chicago. Could he be the infamous lipstick killer, a man who strangled and mutilated 3 women in the mid-1940s? Corrupt Chicago police arrested a janitor who worked at one of the women's apartments. He confessed, but only after his face was pulped and his bones were broken. It wasn't him. Another man, young William Hyderins, confessed, but like the janitor, he later said the cops had brutalized him to extract a confession. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison, but the inconsistencies in the evidence are so numerous that it's almost certain he was an innocent man. It's a long shot, but if Béla Kiss had been murdering women in Hungary pretty much all of his adult life, then there is more than a good chance he didn't just stop after he absconded from his hospital bed. And if he eventually chose the United States, the country he'd always been fascinated by, there is a chilling possibility he could have become one of America's uncaught serial killers. His life has become legend, and sometimes the facts of his existence change depending on which source you're reading. But this much is an indisputable fact. He was one of Europe's most prolific murderers, and we might not know the full extent of his crimes.